This month on In Case You Missed It. The Boston Strangler case from the 1960s is notorious for the brutality of the crimes that took place, and to this day is still a matter of controversy. A recent trove of discovered documents is shedding new light on this decades-old story. A documentary series over 10 years in the making, Slaterville, America's first mill village, tells the rich history of the Blackstone Valley during the Industrial Age. And a fan favorite, Our Town, returns. This time we visit the town of North Providence. All this and much more, in case you missed it. Welcome to In Case You Missed It, where we look back at some of the best local content on Rhode Island PBS that you can watch online now, plus a sneak peek at exciting new content coming soon. First up in this episode, the Boston Strangler was responsible for a shocking murder spree during the 1960s. Now, a half-century after Albert DeSalvo confessed, there's still debate over whether he actually committed the crimes, which makes the discovery of a trove of documents by a former Boston Globe reporter so intriguing. In this Rhode Island PBS weekly story, David Wright explores what was revealed in these documents about DeSalvo's criminal career since childhood.
Whoever said journalism is the first rough draft of history would no doubt appreciate reporter Dick Lehr, who approaches his craft with a scholarly attention to detail.
These are the files that I ended up having to copy by hand.
So this is totally comprehensive.
Unbelievable.
This veteran of the Boston Globe Spotlight team unearthed a treasure trove of documents about one of America's first known serial killers.
This is the story of the self-confessed Boston Strangler.
Albert DeSalvo, immortalized in this 1968 movie starring Henry Fonda and Tony Curtis.
These things you see that come into your head and you don't have anything to do about it, now is the time for you to try to make some sense out of them.
Albert DeSalvo is, a historic crime figure in America. And I know that these files, have just been gathering dust for decades. Has anyone ever seen this before?
Lehr was actually researching another legendary Boston crime figure when he discovered the documents. His reporting on mobster Whitey Bulger was already a best-selling book made into a movie starring Johnny Depp.
Take the money, keep your mouth shut about what you just heard. It's best you're not involved. Take the money, take the money, take the money.
So you're probably best known for Black Mass, a story about Whitey Bulger. And this discovery about Albert DeSalvo, the Boston Strangler, began with more inquiry into Whitey Bulger.
Yeah, no, exactly. I really did stumble onto the Albert DeSalvo material. It was 2011, and Whitey Bulger had been captured in Santa Monica. Big story, international story.
Tonight on World News, they got him. Public enemy number one, the notorious Whitey Bulger.
A story I covered for ABC News. Good evening, Diane. Hiding right here in a rent-controlled apartment. Today, Whitey Bulger had his first of many days in court. He answered questions in a thick Boston accent. And at one point, his girlfriend leaned into him and said, "All these reporters are here for you." And at that, Bulger laughed.
There was suddenly an appetite and an opportunity to write a full-length biography of Whitey Bulger. And I had read about an interesting study that a husband and wife team at Harvard, Sheldon and Eleanor Gluck, both law professors, had conducted on juvenile delinquency that began in the early 1940s.
So you were thinking that maybe Whitey Bulger was among the people that were being studied by the Glucks?
At first I thought maybe I'd get lucky and Whitey was in there.
The Glucks focused on 500 inmates at the Lyman School for Boys in Westborough, Massachusetts, America's oldest reform school, long since closed. Basically, a prison for juvenile delinquents.
So these are first-hand documents from the social workers who were meeting with these boys and giving fairly full detail.
Unbelievable detail in a way that they were like a reporter's reporter. Not only were they sitting down with the boy at the Lyman School, that would be the initial intake, but they also would describe their features, the kind of wonderful detail a writer likes to see. Al has told him that when Al was about 10 years old, this lad admitted that he began to clip from the different 5 and 10 stores in the vicinity of Chelsea. They had an unusual eye for detail that went beyond a Q&A, for example. So I was flipping through these folders and came to the folder numbered 402, flipped it open, and there at the top of the intake sheet was the name Albert DeSalvo.
Albert DeSalvo.
My jaw dropped. I was like, whoa, what the heck?
Turns out, boy number 402 would ultimately confess to being New England's most notorious serial killer, the Boston Strangler, a case that traumatized a generation of women in a more innocent era.
Stranglings have become the chief topic of conversation between housewives on the telephone, co-eds between classes, and secretaries during coffee breaks.
The Strangler's first victim was Anna Slessers, a 55-year-old divorcee, brutally beaten and strangled while a parade passed down her Back Bay street.
In all, the Strangler raped and murdered at least 11 women during the early 1960s. His grisly calling card, a nylon stocking knotted around the necks of his victims. The details in these files offer a real-time glimpse into the mind of a career criminal.
You can watch the full Rhode Island PBS weekly story on watch.ripbs.org. Up next, although the Newport Bridge provides a spectacular view of a small landmass known as Rose Island, most people in the Ocean State know little about its storied past. On this segment of Window on Rhode Island, we visit Rose Island, where manager Mike Healy tells us about its colorful history.
Hi, I'm Mike Healy. Welcome to Rose Island on a beautiful day. We are located on the east passage of Narragansett Bay. We don't actually know how Rose Island got its name, but what we do know is that the Indians called it Conoconoquit. And in Indian, Conoconoquit means the island with the long stem. And if you were to come over the Newport Bridge at low tide, you would see a strip of about 200 yards of beach that appears only at low tide, and the island. So from that perspective, it does look like a rose with a stem. We're going to start at one of the oldest structures on the island, which is the barracks. The barracks was built around 1798 and was designed to hold up to 200 troops in 9 rooms. That's 33 troops to a room. Let's go inside and take a look. Okay, so here we are in the barracks, room number 1, and this is a very interesting structure. This was the first structure in America to be cannonball proof. So as you can see behind me here, the walls are 3 to 4 feet thick. Today though, you can stay in this room just for fun. At the other end of the barracks, I'd like to share with you another piece of the history here, which is that the barracks was part of Naval Torpedo Station Newport in the First and Second World Wars. They actually designated that the explosive for the torpedoes would be stored in the barracks because, remember, it's such a solid structure. The torpedoes were manufactured on Goat Island. They were brought out to Rose Island by barge, and then the train tracks that you see here were used to bring the torpedoes up here, marry the explosives to the torpedoes, and then they were test fired out of Gould Island. But right now, let's head up to the jewel in the crown, the lighthouse on Rose Island. In 1869, the government spent $7,000 to put a lighthouse here, and it ran for 100 years until they built the Claiborne-Pell Bridge. It made the lighthouse obsolete because the lights from the bridge were able to light up the island adequately, so it was no longer a hazard to navigation. But here we are on the ground floor of the lighthouse. Was determined to try and replicate what it looked like at the turn of the 20th century. So one of the things we found, ironically, was the actual coal stove that was used here was in Newport, and we found it and brought it out here. The old washboard that they used, of course, that was your washing machine. We also had, this was your dryer back then. Have you ever heard the expression being put through the ringer? That's what this was. Okay, so now we're coming into the museum room, having left the kitchen and dining area. The hurricane of 1938, which of course was the worst hurricane to ever hit the Northeast. But the remarkable story here at this lighthouse, Rose Island, was that the lighthouse keeper's daughter strapped herself to the flagpole in 1938 and took these photographs, these actual photographs behind us.
Enjoy the full story on watch.ripbs.org, and don't forget to tune in for new episodes of Rhode Island PBS Weekly, Sundays at 7:30 p.m. with an encore on Wednesdays. Up next, Slaterville, America's first mill village, is a historical documentary series that retraces the 200-year history of the first industrialized mill village in the United States. Filmed in 7 states and the United Kingdom, and with more than 150 interviews, this fascinating series brings a centuries-old story from the Blackstone Valley to your screen.
When I first filmed the abandoned mill at the center of my hometown, I had no intention of ever making a film about it. That was a while ago. But when it came time to actually start, I had no idea what I was about to find.
In 1805, Mr. Samuel Slater, with his brother John, passed through all this region, prospecting for the site of a mill. Many of you here today have the place in your mind's eye. But to the rest of us, the outlines being given, we have to fill out the picture for ourselves.
I didn't know that I would have to learn the whole story backwards.
Everything has a beginning.
And I really didn't know why the Slaters had left town, or that we would get to know their descendants.
A lot of this history is cut out.
Or that people just didn't want to talk about stuff.
I'm not sure why.
Wealthier men are putting the brakes on it. You know, they don't want to discuss this.
Or how the man who inherited it had a real problem with
chasing women.
Or discover Slater family letters that had been locked away
for 60 or 70 years.
That was hidden away for generations.
Or the good and not so good ways they spent their fortunes.
This is a lot of money.
History is about the choices you make.
How they treated their workers.
All he needed were hands, children.
And forever altered the landscape of America.
They thought about every aspect of this thing.
And that the very man who started it all
was a traitor.
And I think you should tell the truth.
I had no idea how far we would go, who we would meet, and who we would lose along the way, or where our music would be played. And most of all, I never thought it would be a series.
Without knowing where you've been, how can you gauge where you're going to go?
Slatersville airs Fridays at 8 p.m. through October 14th. Enjoy past episodes on watch.ripbs.org. Next, from Story in the Public Square, we'll hear from multidisciplinary artist Chanupa Haska-Luger about his indigenous science fiction project he calls Future Ancestral Technologies.
Tell us in a nutshell, what is Future Ancestral Technologies?
Yeah, Future Ancestral Technologies is it's an exploration into speculative fiction. I am a science fiction fan. I grew up reading science fiction. I am always marveled about how the process of designing ideas for our future creates a beacon for us as a culture to navigate towards. And rarely do you see indigenous technology exhibited in science fiction. Rarely do you see us exhibited in science fiction. And the violence that you face with that is that we do not exist in the future. And so rather than kind of facing all of the microaggressions and strangeness of our current world, I could imagine a future that celebrates our technology and moves us towards a more sustainable future. And I've been developing all of these kind of works and regalias and ideas to build upon our cosmologies, our indigenous cosmologies, to celebrate the technology that we have been developing, that I've been seeing kind of appropriated and resold as green economies in the 21st century, without any sort of acknowledgement or recognition of the contributions of Indigenous people on our current world. And so it's called Future Ancestral Technology, to look at time through an Indigenous lens, which is not a linear trajectory into a future, but rather a radiating sphere of influence. And that's not just within, human generations, but it celebrates more than human kinship, relationships to environment and earth, and try to reestablish the connection of human beings to as another one of the living things on the planet Earth. I think once we recognize, understand, and accept that we have not carved ourselves out of natural order, the sooner we'll be able to adapt and be in right relationship with the environment that we live in.
Tune in for Story in the Public Square Thursdays at 7:30 p.m. with an encore Sunday mornings at 11. Up next, Our Town is Back, this time featuring North Providence. In this clip, a former resident explores the ties between Ciorlano, Italy, to Lymansville, a neighborhood in North Providence.
So last year during COVID, I had a lot of extra time on my hands. So I really started researching, kind of going beyond the Ancestry.com things and, researching where my ancestors came from, in this case, my great-grandparents. And I found that I was just kind of amazed that there were so many connections to North Providence between this obscure town in the middle of nowhere in southern Italy to North Providence. So we decided to go visit.
Rising above what was once Cranberry Bog Pond, the history of Lymansville extends well beyond its contribution to the Industrial Revolution.
Many Southern Italians came here from the small town of Ciorlano, Italy.
When my great-grandfather was 16 years old, he set sail on the SS Burgundia and landed on Ellis Island in mid-May 1895. His final destination was Providence, Rhode Island, where he would later move to the Lymansville section of North Providence.
My great-grandparents haven't been here in over a century, but the connection to North Providence can be seen right here.
In 1953, North Providence resident Dr. Edward Ritchie, who was born in Ciorlano, refurbished the square as a tribute to the town of his birth. Dr. Ritchie served as the physician for the North Providence School Department. In 1981, the former Lymansville Elementary School was renamed in his honor.
And I was just amazed that there were so many connections to North Providence, and they were there for years and years, and I never knew it. When we first got there, we were walking around in the piazza and some of the little streets there, and we were stopped by some people. They wanted to know what we were doing. So their Italian, my Italian isn't that good, their English wasn't that good, so they called this young woman over to speak to us because she spoke English, and come to find out we were cousins. And we were related through my great-grandmother. I discovered that there was another woman who lived in the town who went to Lymansville Elementary School with me. We were in the second grade together. Now there's only 500 people who live in this town.
Lymansville was a welcomed respite for many Italian immigrants. Mutual aid societies were a vital resource that helped these immigrants assimilate, like the one that was started here by my great-grandfather in 1909.
Enjoy the entire Our Town North Providence episode at watch.ripbs.org. And now, here's a preview of what's coming in October on Rhode Island PBS. Generation Rising, a new Rhode Island PBS series focused on the issues women, Black, Indigenous, Asian, Hispanic, and the LGBTQIA+ community face every day, and the ways they are pushing our society forward for change. Our first episode will unpack what liberation looks like for the LGBTQIA+ community in 2022 and how much it's changed over the years.
Yeah, so our activist dance opera is our response to this residency in the form of Home of Visa Hopkins. It's activism, it's dance, it's theater, it's its own album. It's going to be a coloring book. It's going to be
a coloring book?
Yeah. It's a curriculum, and it's a mermaid fantasy extravaganza. So we really tell the story of the woman who hanged herself on the first voyage of the slavery ship Sally, actually, and how she turns into a mermaid and creates the House of Glitter Mermaid Empire.
How do you all feel about the mermaid controversy happening right now, with there being a Black mermaid in connection to what you? Can you go in depth about that?
So I actually wanted to say something about this because I've been seeing it a lot. Excluding the Little Mermaid for a second, the movie where they have the Black mermaid, it's like someone said it in the comments on Black mermaids on something, and it was like, y'all threw all these brown bodies off the ships into the water and didn't expect not for mermaids to be Black, and I was like, that actually kind of makes sense. But yeah, like, and it's funny because the story that we built around the Isaac Hopkins story has something to do with mermaids and how this woman who gets thrown off the ship turns into a mermaid, her and her baby, and it's just like, yeah, it kind of like falls into that, like how all the brown bodies that was thrown in the water has morphed and shifted to meet that environment under the sea to live again and be reborn. So all this talk about brown mermaids or Black mermaids, I'm like, yeah, I mean, not far off. I mean, it makes sense if you see one. That's probably someone who was in the water, who got thrown in the water and morphed to live in the water.
Generation Rising premieres Friday, October 7th at 7:30 p.m. After leaving his job as a toy designer for Lego, David M. Bird wondered how he would feed his passion for developing interesting characters and storylines, until he looked into a pile of acorns and sticks and realized he had all the parts he needed. Here is an excerpt from our new series, Art Inc., on the story of beacorns.
I think I was always curious as a kid what it would be like to be a tiny little person going through the woods. I think that's pretty universal, really. Like, what kid doesn't like to get down on their knees and check things out? Beacorns are little characters I make out of acorns and sticks. I take them outside and I pose them in a little scene. I wait for animals to come, and then I take pictures of them interacting with wildlife. There's a wide variety of personalities in the beacorn world. They tend to be gentle, they're almost always curious and up to something. There are warriors that are defending against squirrels. They definitely are nurturers. They feed the wildlife and care for them.
Art Inc. debuts online this October. Stay tuned for more details on ripbs.org. Also in October, Rhode Island Judge Frank Caprio is known for giving those who come before him a heavy dose of kindness and a chance to make it right. The judge gives us his take on the importance of getting a second chance.
I haven't met the person yet who hasn't made a mistake and needed a second chance. It's all part of life.
I mean, it's $100. I'm going to dismiss it.
I appreciate it. And I wanted to say, never have I met a judge like you.
I'm not going to comment on that except to say this. I don't do anything different than what I was taught to do by my parents.
My name is Judge Frank Caprio, and this is my take on second chances. I believe in second chances because it's part of life. It gives a person the opportunity to not only recognize their mistakes, but to do something positive about it. In our daily life, I would suspect that most of us make at least 5 mistakes a day. Simple stuff. Maybe we take the wrong turn on the street. That's a mistake. Maybe we say something we really didn't mean to say. Oh, simple stuff. We're talking about major mistakes. Some people commit crimes. That's a whole different situation.
I was going to the blood work for my boy. He's handicapped.
Huh. You were taking your son to the doctor's office?
Yeah, I take him for blood work every 2 weeks because he's got cancer.
You are a good man. My entire life I've been given second chances. I was born into a poor family of immigrants, right? So going through school, it was very difficult. You know, when it was time for me to go to college, I had to work to get through college because we couldn't afford it. And then it was time to go to law school. I couldn't go to law school when I graduated from college because we didn't have enough money in the family. So I had to then find a way to go. So I had a second chance. I was able to get a job teaching school in Providence. I had a second chance. I was able to go to law school. I had a second chance again, right? I was married. I was running for public office. All of these things were second chances for me. My first time I was elected to the city council, I served for 8 years on the city council. Thereafter, I ran for attorney general and I was defeated. I got a second chance in life. Second chance led to me ending up being a municipal court judge, which has opened new opportunities for me and given me an unbelievable opportunity to give others a second chance based on my experiences in life.
Watch Rhode Island PBS Weekly every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. with an encore on Wednesdays. Thank you for tuning in this month. We'll see you next time in case you missed it.